right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Rest and Recovery Podcast. With me is Dr. Allan Bacon, founder of Maui Athletics, online training platform in fitness and nutrition. Welcome, Dr. Allan.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great to connect with you a few months back now at the Sleep and Recovery Summit, virtual summit with Nick Lamb. And yeah, it's great to have you on. I enjoyed doing the panel with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, those are the experiences that I actually really like. Panels and conference speaking, I think for anybody that's getting into coaching or is just really interested in fitness and nutrition, it's one of the best things to do or invest in. And it's funny because I feel like I often end up learning much more from those situations than any kind of, continuing education or certification or anything like that, because you actually get in with a whole bunch of people that have, cut their teeth in the trenches and learned a lot of things. And I think that the great thing about these conferences is you get so many minds together that you can kind of pick, different techniques or different, ways that people do things and incorporate what you feel works best for you in your own routine. And I think that that's how you get better at coaching. So I really appreciated you guys considering me for that. And I think that those are extremely valuable experiences. So for anybody else listening, particularly coaches, it's something that's really worthwhile if you get the chance to, either be a part of that or just, learn from those situations.
Yeah, I would echo the same sentiment. I mean, for me, having the chance to moderate, there was no pressure for me to answer anything. So it was like a good fly on the wall scenario to see people, and you can see the creativity, the thought process, and then just adding context to different things. And it's like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And it's like, even though you may have experience for however many years in a particular venue or topic, it's just seeing somebody else's view on it, and it just changes a little. And it's like, oh, maybe I had a client and that would resonate with them differently, or whatever the thing is. It's fun to see the creativity from the different, folks out there.
It's in my experience, it's probably the best way to refine your technique. That in a good mentorship, if you can find somebody that has had a lot of experience and really knows what they're doing, that's the best way to get started, in my opinion. And then the best way to continue learning is through these conferences and coaching roundtables and things like that.
Well, and it gets off the textbook, which is important, but the textbook is ideal and very structured, where life is not that clean. Right?
Life is really not that clean. And one of the things that I've, at least in my experience, what I've seen with coaching is when you get into coaching, you think that it's very technical. You think that it's, it's all like training program and the right nutrition program. And then the longer that you do it, and don't get me wrong, it's not, that is part of it.
Sure.
But the longer that you do it, the more that you realize that most of coaching is an emotional and psychological support job. And what's really interesting about these situations is not only do they, in a lot of situations, they will reinforce what you thought already, but it'll give you a different perspective to attack whatever that challenge is that a person's facing. Yeah. And when you learn the right ways to connect with someone, you become much more effective. And I think that that's where those really come into play, because you get to see the different techniques that people have kind of sussed out over years of probably trial and error. There's probably a lot of failure coming from these coaches, myself included. When you see these coaches at these, in these situations, and that's a good thing, because it can cause you to avoid those stumbling blocks or just refine your own techniques.
Yeah. It's interesting, the human condition, and it's, when you were saying that, it made me think of the word permission. And I don't know if it's due to confidence or what, but why we are all looking for that permission, so to speak, or validation to be able to do the thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that even when coaches first start out and getting the validation to do the thing, I think that you feel like you are probably less qualified than you are when everybody else experiences that as well.
Yeah.
And hearing firsthand experiences from people and seeing what works for them, I think gives you a lot of confidence.
Gotcha. So, Maui Athletics, you've been coaching for a while, but based on our conversation and a little bit of learning about you, you didn't start out necessarily as a athletic professional. Uh,
No.
well, let's start with, a little bit of background, and then how you pivoted to more the coaching side of things.
So I had always been pretty involved in fitness since a young age. I mean, I started lifting at around 16 or 17, but that was more of a necessity thing than anything else. I was a high school athlete, and I'm 6'1", and I was 6'1" then too. But the problem was I was 170 pounds at the time. And for sports and everything, I wanted to put on a little bit of size to be able to be a little bit more competitive. And so
Sure.
that's what really started that journey off a bit. And then, I continued doing it for many, many years, and my life took me to getting a doctorate in dental surgery. And in your neck of the woods, down in the Maryland, Virginia way. And during that time period, I was helping a lot of people. I was helping friends and everything in the gym, essentially coaching for free and just doing it as kind of a side thing for fun.
Sure.
I started formulating professionally for the dietary supplement industry. That just was the way that it is for many years. That's the way it was for many years. And, I had been practicing for 10 years or so. And I turned to my wife, and there was a couple things that all happened at the same time to kind of spur the whole, okay, well, let's look into fitness as a thing, as a profession or side profession, at least. One, my dad got throat cancer, and he was a doctor too. And one of the things that I talked to him about was, if you had any regrets, what would you do? And he said that he wished that he would have spent some more time doing some things that he loved and spending some time with his family, because if you own your own practice, you're spending a lot of time there, because if you're not there, it doesn't function.
Right.
And so at the same time, when I was practicing, I was running a rather large clinic with 7 or 8 other doctors, and I was getting 9 days a year off, and that included sick days. So if I got sick, a vacation for that year could be in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And so he had mentioned, he wished he would have spent more time doing that. And I turned to my wife and I was like, hey, I'm thinking about starting this as a side gig. If it takes off, great. If it doesn't, no big deal. Would you like to do a coaching business with me? And she was a good fit for that, because she was an American record holding Olympic weightlifter. She competed in Worlds in 2019 and took silver in Worlds
Oh, cool.
for her,
Awesome.
age and weight group. And we complemented each other well, because she can handle Olympic weightlifting and CrossFit athletes. She was also a regionals qualified CrossFit athlete, which is great, because by connection, I can make fun of CrossFit and it doesn't seem terrible. And so she's really good with CrossFit athletes and Olympic weightlifters, and she can certainly do general health. But I was always focused on powerlifting, bodybuilding, and general health. And so we could start Maui Athletics, and we could serve a very large population. And so I did that, both full-time jobs, practicing and Maui Athletics for 2 years. And then Maui Athletics got to the point where it was sustainable, and it was allowing us to pay the mortgage and pay for, if I can go out to a restaurant and not have to check my bank account to get a simple
Right.
meal, then I feel like
Right.
I'm succeeding in life. And so it got to that point, and ended up moving out to Maui, retired from practicing, and have done that ever since.
That's a very cool journey. I love the lesson. You hear that a lot, where it's like, anecdotally, but like folks they interview folks in the later years of their life, and they ask what should they have done differently, and it was, something along those lines of like spending more time doing the things you love with the people you love.
Yeah, and I
Not
think that
ten
I
extra
think that
hours at work.
yeah, no, well, which is funny, because I'd spend that much time doing it now, but I can get up and leave whenever I want, and it's more of a choice than anything else.
Right.
I think that, we're always conditioned, at least, my age group and higher was always conditioned to get that really stable, reliable job, and save these types of things for your weekends.
Right.
And I think that in the past, that was probably a very viable recommendation, because, what sort of life did most personal trainers have? But then with the explosion of the internet, social media, all that type of stuff, I think it's opened up a lot of avenues to be able to, help a lot of different people. And I think that gives us a little bit more autonomy in what we do. Um, and at least for me, things like Facebook groups in particular have been a really beneficial thing to have for my business, because it gives me a way to have conversations with people.
Right.
And I think that that's where people really start to, identify with you, feel like you're actually helping them. They get that sense of, you care a little bit more than maybe what a person that you don't know, you would expect a person that you don't know to.
Right.
And I think it's extremely rewarding. And for anybody that's considering making that leap, the one thing that I always tell people is, if you have to continually work multiple jobs for a few years when you're starting out, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you failed. That doesn't mean that anything's going wrong,
Right.
and a lot of the people that have steady businesses right now, they did the same thing, because the reality is you're not going to be making a ton of money when you start out. But how does that affect your quality of life? When I was practicing medicine, I didn't even have the ability to get in for a general health checkup with a physician, because I worked the exact same hours that they did.
Yeah.
And so,
Right. Yeah. It's like
so
you're a doctor trying to help other people, regardless of the type of doctor, but then you can't take care of yourself.
yeah, and that's actually one of the funny things about doctors, is that they tend to be some of the worst patients.
Right.
And so now, making my own schedule is kind of a nice thing, and getting out and being able to do that type of stuff. But quality of life is certainly something that people should consider, and I think that kind of gets swept under the rug a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that word autonomy. You have the opportunity to make the choice that's the best interest for yourself. And you can do that, as opposed to being, and again, there's nothing wrong with it, right? I've been corporate job for my entire career, in that generation, probably a little ahead of you on, this is what you did. This was the process. You went to corporate and got a good job, got a good pension,
Mhm.
401k, and then, retire, and nothing right or wrong. But to your point, the diversity of options is available. There's
Mhm.
mechanisms to be able to do it and make it sustainable for your life, and probably faster than historically, right? Like
I
what
would
maybe
think so, yeah.
2 or 3 years now probably took like a decade
Mhm.
to do. Uh, but yeah, but I like that word autonomy, because you have that choice to do what's in the best interest for your household.
Yeah, and I think that makes people feel um, a lot happier with their life. When you feel like the things that the choices that you're making are truly your choices, it makes going through with those choices, even if there's hard work involved, a lot easier. And that's what I was saying with, like, I'm still working pretty long days. I building content for social media, keeping in touch with clients, answering questions, because I do questions. I give them the ability to email me 24/7. Um, and I'll answer questions for them whenever I'm available. But the fact is, it's my choice, and so it feels great to be able to do.
Yeah, and I've noticed that it's being engaged with you for the last number of months. The content and the questions, and it is really, really incredible. Not just to say that because you're here, but it's really helpful, um, because they're specific, right?
Mhm.
And there's some granular things that you get into the nuance of health, fitness, and nutrition that I think a lot of people get lost in. Uh,
Mhm.
that
Well, I think that people generally know. It's funny when you talk to a person, you say, okay, and this is a good exercise for people when they want to essentially move forward, when they feel trapped. Ask yourself, what would a healthy person do in my situation? I think that most people have a good inkling of what they could be doing. I think that the nuance, like you pointed out, is difficult, and the nuance is difficult, or being actionable is a little bit difficult. But I think that asking yourself, okay, well, what would a healthy person do, is a good starting point for most people, especially if you feel locked, because I think that can give you some good indications for starting points. Now, the nuance is can be difficult, because let's be honest, there's so many people in the fitness space. Who do you listen to?
right,
And the biggest issue with social media, I mean, it comes with a lot of benefits and a lot of cons, right? And the biggest issue, in my opinion, is that oftentimes the largest accounts are some of the least trustworthy, but there's a reason for that. Because the reality of the situation is that most fitness and nutrition is pretty straightforward and bland. It's not easy, but it's decently simple. It's, we all know that we should be eating whole foods. We know that we should probably be eating more fruits and vegetables. We know that we should probably be eating lean meats instead of, the majority of our day being, whatever it is. But that doesn't cause an emotional response when you get those answers. What does cause an emotional response? Absolutely ridiculous bullshit. And so when you get somebody that comes out and they're like, look at this absolutely ridiculous bullshit that I've put out, the people that are prone to believing absolute bullshit will hit like. The people that think it's ridiculous will share it and will say, look at how ridiculous this is. And then the people that believe that from their friends lists will see that, and then they'll follow that guy. So the people that tend to have the largest following will often be some of the least trustworthy people, or the least reliable people, because of the way that social media works. And it's difficult for general population to understand, well, who should I listen to? Because this person who gets all of this play, people are saying, he might not be right about this, but then why would so many people follow him?
Right. Yeah.
Because he gets all the airtime.
All positive. Right.
And so he gets airtime from both sides, whether they agree with him or not.
Yeah.
And this isn't like a bitter rant. This is a rant to say, hey, this is the reality of the situation. Be very critical of the types of people that you're getting information from. And it's nearly impossible to tell who is 100% on board and who's not, because even things like having a PhD or a doctorate or anything like that doesn't necessarily suggest that you know what you're talking about. Now, it's a good initial indicator, because at least there's some formal background of maybe biology or anatomy or, something functional, or the ability to read a research study should be a little bit better in that population.
Right.
But it's funny because people will ask that question. Okay, well, if you're going to lament, follower count as a problem, then how do I know who to follow? And it's difficult. And I think that the really only thing that I can recommend to people, and maybe you have some ideas that can help me, and then I can turn this around and tell other people when they ask me. The best thing that I think that can be done is ask these people questions and then see the type of response that you get back. Can they explain why and the how of something? Can they back that up, hopefully with peer-reviewed research when possible? We talked about anecdote a little bit earlier. Anecdote when necessary, because we don't have the peer-reviewed research. Peer-reviewed when possible. And even more importantly, can you explain the other side of the argument and why that may or may not be accurate? And I think that latter part is probably what's the best thing, in my opinion, when people are saying, well, how do I vet who I'm talking about? We'll present the counter argument and see if there can be an explanation for that. And because people can oftentimes really get behind their own stance. But because maybe they've been looking, if I go, I'm just going to pick something at random. If I wanted to say, I'm going to pick something like controversial, and I don't want to get into it because it can always cause people to but let's say we say BCAAs, right?
Right.
If I go to the internet and I go, what are the benefits of BCAAs? Well, the answers that I'm going to get in a search are obviously benefits for BCAAs, but you're never going to see the other side of the equation, because the way that it'll kick back results is as if you're looking for that specific answer. And so we'll see people that will have some kind of investment in an idea, whether that's emotional, monetary, or whatever it is. And they'll know their side of the equation very, very well, but they might not know the other side of the equation because of the way that they've been looking for information.
Right. No, that's a great thought. I was curious where you're going to go with that, because I've always wrestled with it. But I like that last point of really understanding where the other person who's got the counter argument is coming from. And I guess you need to have the humility enough to really listen to it without it, having that your own BS meter on, saying, oh, they're full of crap right away, but actually discerning what they're saying.
Well, we're all going to have our own biases, right?
Sure.
And the reality of the situation is that research changes over time. And I think that the people that are really genuine change their stance when new research comes out. And I think that being extremely hardline about stuff, it might be monetarily expedient in a lot of cases, especially if you sell something based on an idea.
Yeah.
But I think that the people that do the best are honest with the fact, like, oh, hey, I screwed up. And I guarantee you that even if you're one of the smartest people in the world, that's going to happen
Sure.
because of the way that that data changes. We get different studies. And again, going back to the BCAAs, when in 2005, 2000, I would have told you, yeah, let's bring this into play, because the data at the time that we had was, we did one study in wrestlers where they starved the wrestlers and then they gave them BCAAs and then they could go a little bit longer. We had another study where they were mice and we starved them and we made them tread water in a pool and we gave them BCAAs and they were able to tread water longer. Well, BCAAs have calories, and I know that they list none on supplement labels, but that's an FDA loophole. They still have calories. You're just legally not required to list them. So they don't list them because if they were honest and listed the 4.65 calories per gram, their competitor who doesn't list them will get all the sales because people will say, oh, this is 0 calorie, I can drink that. So the calories were providing these benefits, and people weren't really realizing because we didn't have a full range of data at the time. And now 20 years later, we look at the data and we say, okay, well, if we're getting, X amount of grams of protein in per day, it essentially negates most, if not all, of these benefits. But the situations that we had these people in were giving us this idea that it did work. So at the time I would say, yeah, you absolutely need to do this. And now at this time, I'm like, no, you don't need to do this. Does that mean that I'm bad at what I do? Not necessarily. It means that I've adjusted based on, the information that's been presented.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I've heard it stated, we know in part and see in part. I think it goes back to the beginning of the conversation of why, those panel discussions are so good of having conversations on specific topics. If you see people from different angles coming from different views, right? You've got somebody who maybe research analytics to grew up as a pure athlete and came from that angle, or whatever the topic is, but you've got just a way to triangulate. But I came up with this term for myself to kind of rationalize as semi-permanent, right?
That's how research is. It's semi-permanent. That's the best way. That's the best way to explain it. It's semi-permanent. How much do we know? We absolutely know this right now.
Yeah, right now.
And then tomorrow may be different.
Barring additional ingredients and nuances and
right.
whatever, but yeah.
And the human body is so complex anyways. And we were talking about BPC 157 before we got on here, and I'm 100% on board with the possibility that it could be very good.
Mm-hmm.
Right now,
those are peptides, right?
They're healing peptides. They're peptides for soft tissue healing, essentially, and they're essentially, I would say, the rage right now in the fitness community from a healing standpoint. But we don't know that from human studies. There's no real data in humans showing that this, what dosage does this work? What are the side effects? What are the long-term issues with this? We have no idea.
Right.
And we're basing this off of animal data and molecular data, which is fine as a starting point.
Right.
But it doesn't tell us what it does in the human body. And I think that we get caught up a lot with that because talking heads in the fitness community love to look at molecular data, and then they'll make an entire podcast on, look, we see that this does this, but there's a huge difference between, in vitro data and in vivo data in the human body, where you put something in the human body and then all of a sudden you have all these compensatory mechanisms. The liver is doing something to inactivate this that it didn't do when we just had a cell culture.
Yeah.
Or we had first pass effects, and first pass effects are, well, you ingested this and then it was inactivated before it actually entered circulation. And, we see stuff like that all the time. It's amazing how something works in the body, and it can be completely unpredictable based off of animal and molecular data. And so, we're semi-permanent in the fact that we're always kind of moving forward in this, and it's nicer to see more and more human data. But until that time, it's difficult to recommend a lot of things. BPC 157 being an example for me. Now, I do admit, and you had brought this up earlier, that there is a lot of anecdotal data for it, and I think that I would love to see some human trials. If we bring it to those human, phase 1, phase 3 through phase 3 trials, if we do that correctly, I would love to see that. I don't find that there's a lot of push for that from pharma right now, but this is one of those compounds that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I follow a little bit on it, and it is interesting to see. And probably just like the internet, you're going to find what you're looking for, but and social media will show
Yeah.
you what you looked for one time. Um, but it's definitely interesting to see that kind of evolution. I think it's a good example of like what we're talking about with the semi-permanent of science, of like we keep learning things. There's so many layers and complexities. Um, in my simple mind, I keep thinking about it as like an airplane dashboard, as the human system is like there's buttons, levers, beeps, and bops. And it's like you press one and you don't know what it's going to do to the other one across the board, right? And it's like maybe a waterbed is a better example. You push on one side, it
I
goes
mean,
up, but
yeah, yeah,
it's
that's
so calm. So, you know, anyway.
yeah, I mean it is. And I think that, you know, this goes back to that whole, how credible is a person? Well, if they're giving an explanation of this type of stuff, what kind of information are they backing themselves up with? If they're acting extremely confident in something and then they're giving you data in a nematode, we should probably, hit the brakes a little bit and maybe back off and be like, okay, well, what is this doing in humans? And I think that that can be a very important thing for people that are really trying to vet fitness professionals out there, both coaches and Gen Pop, because I think the coaches have just the same problem.
Right.
You get done a certification course, and what does that teach you about reading research? Absolutely nothing. And so you need to be able to figure out, well, how do I move forward? And because most coaches are doing this with the right motives in mind, and they
Right.
want to be as good as they possibly can be.
Exactly.
And this is again a benefit to some of these conferences and things, because oftentimes that's a good indicator of potential quality of a person. If they've been chosen by their peers to speak at one of these things, they might be on a little bit more to the right path.
Right.
And so, learning these different ins and outs of you don't necessarily have to learn how to read research, but you have to learn how to vet properly who you should get information from. And there's only so many ways that you can do that. And I hope I'm presenting some that can give some benefit here. But
Yeah.
you
No,
know,
I
that
think you
that
have it. I think it would be a great, uh, for lack of a better term, a master class of some sort on like the framework to discern, for yourself. And at the end, how do you get best educated without becoming a research analyst yourself,
Mhm.
but as a chief advocate for your own health, right? From a
I
user,
think
from
this would be one of the most worthwhile continuing education courses that has ever come out. I mean, I would absolutely love to see something like that put together. And if you want to do it, I will 100% accept royalties.
I'm open to a collaboration. So,
Mhm.
uh, cool. I think we just created a great masterclass. But it's interesting you mentioned that too. Is like this. I wrote down the skill of research and being able to read them, and there's only so much you can do, but really understanding the context of certain research put out there and understanding what it means. But it's definitely a needed skill um, within the professionals community. But I think even more so now, even for the Gen Pop, is to really understand some foundational questions to ask to get that, so you can get that BS meter working.
I mean, advertising is a powerful thing. And we've never been more inundated with ads than we are now. I mean, we're seeing them every third post when you scroll down any kind of news feed. And so, yeah, this is going to be one of those critical life skills that's going to make the difference between um struggling and feeling frustrated because you're just getting some BS information, or actually progressing well and feeling like you're getting something out of it.
Yeah. Um, let's pivot to the Gen Pop side of things, and well, we're kind of talking about it a little bit, but or the everyday athlete out there, to on the nutrition side. How do you know? Like, there's 25 different diets out there. I don't know if it's 25, but there's keto and all that kind of stuff, and it's like,
How do you figure out which one's the right one for you?
Yeah, right. It or to the point of like, semi-permanent, is there a wrong one, or is it understanding it's a tool for me and see how I respond?
So assuming there's no pathology in play, I think that because certainly if you've got pathology in place, certain things would make sense. Like keto, if you've got some kind of like neurological disorder, maybe a seizure disorder. I mean, yeah, do what you need to do to survive. Short of that, I think my opinion is that any sort of exclusionary diet is probably wrong from the start. And I say that, I mean, if you look at any kind of nutrition research, you will find research pushing veganism, you will find research pushing carnivore. But if you look at the quality of research out there, typically ones that push exclusionary diets tend to either have flaws or tend to be very underpowered.
Hmm.
And humans in general, I would say this is probably not controversial. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I would say that most people would accept the fact that we're omnivores. I mean, we can eat pretty much everything. I mean, I think that it's hard to argue that there aren't benefits to fruits and vegetables. I think it's hard to argue that there aren't benefits to eating meat. And so I think that if people are looking for the optimal diet, they do go with that. And this is the boring answer. You go with that moderation that has a variety of different things in it. I think exclusionary diets are probably missing the point. People talk about, okay, well, carnivore is a good choice. Well, we've got some downsides there. We're missing out on a lot of fiber. I don't know if anybody would really argue that fruits and vegetables don't have some decent data about anti-cancer benefits from all cause over an entire lifetime.
Right.
And vitamins and nutrients. You're not going to get phytonutrients from meat. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we've got veganism. And vegans have massive nutrient deficiencies as well. Now, if you're a pescatarian or a vegetarian that eats dairy and eggs, you have a much easier time of building a very reliable nutrition set. But pure veganism, I mean, we use just as bad information to push that as we do to push carnivore. I mean, they compare veganism to a McDonald's diet, and then they're like, look at how good veganism is, and you're like, no shit, you just compared it to,
The worst of the worst.
70-30 beef and fries.
Yeah, and it's
And
questionable if it's real beef in the first place.
yeah, I mean, this is the things that people are doing to push some of these exclusionary diets is absolutely ridiculous. And so you look at the data, and if people put a gun to my head and they're like, well, what's the best diet? I mean, I sit there and I say, well, whatever is sustainable for you, but if I have to choose one, I'd probably say Mediterranean, because it's got lean meats. I mean, different lean meats, a lot of fruits and vegetables, different whole grains, different olive oil, all that kind of stuff. And it's just a good balance. Now, does that mean that there's any specific diet that's 100% right for you? No. What is the most sustainable that can get you eating mostly whole, minimally processed foods, and preferably a variety of foods that include fiber? And I bring that up because it drives me nuts when coaches too, get really focused on macros and, the whole, if it fits your macros push. And I remember when that was coming about, and bodybuilding.com in the early 2000s, and it was an answer to people when they say, well, can I eat white rice? And you said, if it fits your macros. Can I eat a Pop-Tart a day? Yeah, if it fits your macros. That doesn't mean that you make every gram of carb in your entire day out of Frosted Flakes, because there's a difference between understanding that macros will guide weight loss or weight gain, and understanding that the types of food actually influence what you lose, what you gain, and your total health. And so I think that that just like exclusionary diets can be problematic, thinking that you can eat whatever you want within the realm of macros can be problematic. So this is one of the reasons that I've mentioned fiber multiple times, because if you're not getting it in a supplement, having a decent fiber intake is a proxy for having a higher level of total nutrition within your diet, some foods that are more nutritional.
Okay.
If you're eating foods that are extremely highly processed, most of those are going to be pretty devoid of fiber. And so this is a decent proxy. It's kind of like, have you ever seen where people will monitor, coaches will have their clients monitor step count to take a daily approximation of, NEAT, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis?
Yep.
Essentially a way to be able to figure out, okay, well, how much is this person moving daily? Does the step count tell us everything about that? No, because NEAT comprises everything from fidgeting, all the movement that we do, walking certainly, but it's the one that we can track the most easily. And I think that fiber is a similar thing from a nutritional sense. It's kind of the nutritional analogy
Okay.
in that, can you get fiber from a supplement? Yes, you can, but if you're not getting it from a supplement, you can kind of use that as a proxy of, okay, well, am I getting a variety of different things in my diet that could be higher in nutrition? Yeah, sure. So how do you figure out the best diet? Minimally processed whole foods for the majority of your diet. Do you have some room for some more indulgent foods? Yeah, sure. Don't blow your entire calorie content for the day out on that type of stuff, but you can fit some of that stuff, particularly if it increases your overall consistency and adherence to the minimally processed foods.
Yeah. Yeah. What I heard is ice cream is okay. That's all I heard.
So that's what everybody's going to take away
Sure.
from this is Allan told me to eat ice cream.
Yeah.
So Allan said eat dairy. And so
right. I'm going to completely misconstrue the recording of this, and is like,
right.
Dr. Allan says ice cream diet is a must.
If you really have an agenda, you can get somebody to edit this for me to be like, just chop me into being like, just eat ice cream.
Ice cream with fiber, you're good to go.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on the different named diets, essentially?
Yeah, your beginning statement is kind of how I land on it. Is you start making absolute statements, I think I'm not listening to you, or I think you're overly biased, meaning pure carnivore or pure vegan, I think is just a hot mess of an idea. Could it be a tool based on where your personal health is? Yeah, it could be for a season.
Yeah.
Maybe, and I don't know enough about physiology, but in very much a novice when it comes to the nutrition stuff, but understanding how your body is operating, the different organ functions, and what could be happening within your system, and also the idea of the processed foods and what's getting gunked up in your body. And so,
well, the other thing that I do want to point out too is for otherwise healthy people, there is no diet in the world that has been shown to be better than just a standard smart omnivore diet. Straight up. There's no study that has ever compared carnivore to a well thought out, let's just call it Mediterranean, so I don't have to keep like specifying, but like,
sure.
there's no study that compares a well thought out Mediterranean diet or omnivore style diet to carnivore or to veganism that shows that they're superior.
Yeah.
So just because you might have seen a podcast that was pushing the benefits of these things versus a trash diet doesn't mean that you need to feel the pressure to switch to a very exclusionary diet that may not be sustainable for you, just to either feel hardcore or think that you're going to get some kind of special benefit, because you won't. It's more about making smarter choices overall. And what's really funny is these people will switch to veganism, or they'll switch to carnivore, and then they'll start working out, and then they'll get more than 4 hours of sleep, and then they'll drink some water, and then and then all of a sudden they're like, I feel so much better since I switched to carnivore, or whatever it is,
Right.
And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when people tend to make changes, they don't tend to make tiny changes. Now, as coaches, we always push small incremental changes are the way to success. That's not how people work. People work with, I'm either in or I'm out. And so they'll go in, and they will all of a sudden start, doing their cardio, and they've been doing it for 3 weeks. They started lifting, they started getting some sleep, they started doing some kind of stress relief, and they've thrown it all into play at the same time. It's a kitchen sink type of thing, which isn't necessarily bad. I mean, if you're going to make a life change, great. Make as many changes as you can handle at once,
right,
and feel happy with yourself and feel like you're able to get it done.
Yeah.
But I think that people kind of misattribute the benefits sometimes to these specific diets to the fact that they've actually started doing some of the other things that they should have been doing in the first place.
Yeah, you start pulling on 6 or 8 other levers. It's like, all right, which one is helping? But that kind of, to me, goes back to our kind of social media chat on anecdotal, and sort of. But I think in our conversation, for those listening, we were kind of chatting back and forth on the awareness factor of individuals, including myself, on like how I feel and why I feel the way I do from a particular food or whatever. Is like, developing that self-awareness on how I respond, 30 minutes to an hour and a half after eating a thing, uh,
Mhm.
whether it's, heavy fiber or heavy whatever, and being able to process, a heavy protein diet or a heavy fat based diet, and how I feel after the fact. What are your thoughts on kind of what are the indicator lights on our dashboard to understand how our body's functioning so we can understand ourselves better?
I think you need to give it time. And the reason that I say this and see how things go over time, I think that people jump the gun on a lot of these things.
Hmm.
And we talked a little bit before, and so you probably understand that I value anecdote a little bit less than most people, but I only value it a little bit less because I feel like some of the nuance gets lost a lot. So for instance, when you're talking about eating food and you know feeling the way that you feel because you've eaten a certain food, some of these things can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Because let's say that you take something like gluten or dairy and you cut it out of your diet because you say, okay, well, I've heard a lot of hype about this. I want to cut this out. I want to see how I feel, right? And you cut it out and you start to feel pretty good. And then you say, okay, well, I want to test it. I want to come back and I want to see this. I want to eat this to see if I've done the right thing, right? And so maybe you never had real problems with dairy before, but if you eat a lot of dairy, I mean, anybody that can even digest dairy may feel a little bit bloated. Dairy's kind of heavy. Um, if you've stopped eating it, your body's going to downregulate lactase production. And so these people come back and they'll eat it, and then it will completely wreck their stomach. And they'll say, look, I'm lactose intolerant. You're not lactose intolerant. You just stopped eating something. So your body stopped producing the enzyme needed to break it down. Now, if you would continue to eat it and hopefully bring it in slowly into your diet over 3 to 4 weeks, you would be back to eating it just fine. But I think that this idea of us 100% knowing our bodies, I think that people probably know a lot less about their body than they think they do. I think that a lot of times people will um, want to see a result, and they kind of do those mental gymnastics around it a bit to make that out. Now, to your point, does anecdote have value? Yeah, it does. I think that what we need to do is we need to first look at whatever we're trying to claim and say, okay, well, is there any actual research backing for whatever this is that might explain why I'm feeling one way or another? And then when that's not in play, um, that's where we fall back more on the anecdote than we do
Hmm.
anything else. But I think that, I gave you that example of a steroid placebo. There was a study done, and Scott and I talked about this before going on air, but it was a really interesting one where they took competitive powerlifters and they gave them they gave them a saccharin pill. I had commented it was rice earlier, but it was saccharin. They gave them a saccharin pill and they told them that it was a steroid. And so they did a baseline, 1 rep max test on squat, bench, deadlift. Then they gave them the saccharin pill, told them it was a new fast acting steroid. 1 week later, they tested again. Nearly everybody in the test, the average increase on squat, bench, and deadlift was 11 kilograms in 1 week. That's 25 pounds. It's a massive jump in 1 week with a saccharin pill. And then a week later, they told half of the people that they were given a saccharin pill. The half that they told, and they tested again, the half that they told that they were given a saccharin pill dropped back to baseline. And so our expectations of things working are incredibly powerful. And so can we trust anecdote? Not entirely.
Hmm.
If you have the choice between one or more innocuous things and there's no real negative, go with your anecdote, because you're going to be motivated to do that more, and you're probably going to get better results because of that. If you have data suggesting that you probably shouldn't be doing this, I would stray away from anecdote a little bit more, because I don't think that we can trust ourselves as much as we think we can.
Yeah.
So I think that there's utility. I don't want to completely disregard anecdote, but I think that we probably think that we know our bodies better than than what we actually do.
Yeah. No, I
If that
definitely,
makes sense.
it does to me. And I'm with you in the sense of like, my transformation of understanding myself over the last 12, 15 years is exponential, right? For the
Mm,
longest time, I would eat something, feel a certain way, and just and wonder why I felt like crap. And then I stopped eating it or reduced it or whatever, did some kind of change. And then it's like, I feel better. It's like, all right, so maybe for me, it was like, I need to have less meat or whatever the thing is, right?
No,
Or
and that's completely fine. And I don't want it to be misconstrued or misinterpreted by the way that I express things, that I'm
sure,
saying
sure.
that people are wrong in doing that.
Right, right.
What I want to say is make sure that you're at least giving it a chance and trying to be
Trending.
unbiased about it when you're doing that. Because
Right.
if you're making a choice to say eat less meat, and it may be something like you're going to eat less red meat because you feel fine on fish or whatever it is. Well, that's okay, because remember, we've got multiple choices, and fish provide a large variety of nutrients. If you're getting iron in, in adequate amounts in other ways, if you're getting, whatever you need to get in nutrition wise, and there is a a choice that you can make, and one isn't a major negative. You're not completely removing all of meat from your diet
Right.
and then trying to subsist off of,
So,
tofu, then you're probably fine. And the only reason that I bring that up is I don't know if you've ever programmed for vegans before, nutrition.
no.
It is very, very difficult. And people will argue this, but then when you actually get down into it, you're like, oh crap. When you try to program for vegans and you want optimal performance in physique, it can be very, very challenging to get an adequate protein intake. And it's challenging because even the highest, there are a couple options that actually are very good. But outside of a couple options, if you're not eating the exact same thing pretty much every day, um, it becomes difficult because the higher protein type choices either aren't really that high in protein. Like quinoa is not really that high in protein,
Oh,
but
really?
it's known as it's not. If you look at the protein compared to the amount of carbs that come with that type of thing, you're getting a ton of carbs. And so, even with things like tofu, there's a lot of fat in some of these things. And so when you're trying to hit those protein counts, what you're ending up doing is massively shooting up your calorie counts, which can become counterproductive depending on what your goals are.
Okay.
And so, keeping these things in perspective, and if you've got a choice between maybe fish or red meat, and the red meat makes you feel bad, well, great. There's no real negative there.
Right.
And if you're going to the extreme and then we start to get into the exclusionary diets, well, maybe there are some negatives there, or there are some parts about that make it much more difficult for you to fit into your life or to get the proper nutrition that you need.
Yeah.
And that's why we see things with veganism, like we see B12 deficiencies, we see iron deficiencies, we see carnitine deficiencies, because those foods they're not great sources of that. And so then a lot of your diet ends up becoming supplements. And I told you, I formulate for the dietary supplement industry. So if anybody's going to tell you that supplements can serve a purpose, it's going to be me. But what I do stress is the fact that you don't want to resort to supplements when you don't have to. And if food is going to provide it, get it from food.
Right.
Because there's a lot more benefit getting stuff from food than there is ever getting from a dietary supplement.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Not that you need my affirmation, but I mean, I completely agree with that, because it's a reason it's called a supplement. It's the
Mm,
support, substantiate, not replace
yeah.
those things.
Now,
So,
also having said this, if people are turning to veganism because of a moral reason, that's fine. I completely support you with that, because you're not doing it to say, hey, this is healthier because I saw Game Changers on Netflix. You're
yeah.
doing it because you feel like you have a moral obligation, and that's beautiful. If you are comfortable with making that choice and you understand that you're going to face some hurdles that an omnivore is not going to face, that's okay. And I think that you're making the right choice for you. But the whole mysticism behind these exclusionary diets and somehow being healthier, I mean, that's a documentary type thing.
Yep.
That's not a reality type thing.
Right. Makes for good recorded content.
It makes for a ton of views and a ton of discussion online too.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, you mentioned it a couple of times, and we're kind of coming up on time, but I don't want to take too much of your time. But calories.
Hmm.
So, is it a valid metric to use? What's the context around calories? And there's probably some subjectivity of, like we were saying with just now, with the justification. It's like a calorie is a calorie, so I can eat 32 Snickers. But anyway, I'll throw that out.
So calories are, I mean, sicko is real. Calories in, calories out. Energy balance is what guides weight loss or weight gain. So is it a viable thing to count them? Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's probably one of the more reliable ways to have a steady idea of what is guiding your change. Does it tell the entire story? No. And this goes back to the if it fits your macros conversation that we were having earlier. It doesn't tell what is lost, what is gained, and overall health. Because like you said, you could, if you need 1,800 calories per day to maintain, you could eat 1,800 calories in Snickers, but you're going to have a vastly different body composition than someone who ate 1,800 calories, in lean meats, whole grains, whatever it is, because of the different effects that has on your body. So is calorie counting a viable tactic? Yeah, 100%. And it probably should be for those that have very distinct goals for their physique and their performance, for people that really want to see the best progress, fastest progress possible. It's almost required for a really reliable way. Now, you can do it different ways. You can do it by weighing and macro counting. You can do it by getting rough estimates through, precision nutrition uses like hand guides and stuff like that. I've seen plate guides used, and all of these different things are viable, but they're just different ways to get into a ballpark of calorie counts and maybe even protein or whatever counts there are. So tracking that in some way is probably necessary if you want the most reliable outcomes. Now, is that the end of the story? No, because you want to pair that with habit and routine based learning and coaching. And, that's where people talk about have this many servings of fruits and vegetables a day. This is how you deal with cravings. These are the types of eating patterns that can help you, depending on the person. And, as an example, people talk about intermittent fasting as being this, it basically cures every issue that you've ever had under the sun. It will make you lose weight. It'll make you gain muscle. It will solve a gambling addiction. It will make you a better parent. And what's really funny is when you look at the data surrounding it, it is no different in results from a continuous diet when you equate protein and calories. But it is a habit choice that can be used to great effect for people that are trying to lose body fat, because some people don't like it, but in some people it works really, really well, myself included. And I'm not saying that there's any kind of metabolic benefit or anything like that, but I like eating larger dinners. And if I eat a large breakfast, then I'm gonna eat my normal lunch, then I'm gonna eat a larger dinner. Well, that's a lot more calories when I'm trying to cut body fat than if I just waited until 12 or 1 and started eating then. And then I essentially have, my lunch and then a smaller maybe snack and then the dinner that I was going to have anyways.
Yeah.
And so these combinations of habits and routines and tactics with the tracking is probably the best way forward if you have very specific fitness and health goals for yourself, because it gives you the most control.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I think that's helpful. I heard back and forth on calories and whether it's a valid metric, but to me, it's a tool.
Well, what's your alternative?
That's the thing, is like, I don't know what, the only other thought I would have would be the macros, but then that's still,
macros is calorie counting essentially. Because what you're doing is you're saying, okay, well, this many. Now, the good thing about macros, and that's not necessarily mutually exclusive from calorie counting.
Sure.
Because like I said, it doesn't, for weight loss and weight gain, it doesn't really matter what diet you choose, dietary pattern you choose, as long as protein and calories are equated, you're going to lose or gain weight roughly the same. I mean, you could be keto or you could be high carb, and it doesn't matter if calories and protein are equated, you're going to get the same results. And there's a lot of research showing that. But counting macros and counting calories, there's not really much distinction between the two. I mean, one gives you a little bit more control because macros is broken down even another level. But when you're counting macros, you're essentially counting calories, because 100 grams of protein is this many calories and 100 grams of carbs is this many calories. And so, it's just a different way to do a similar thing.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess to your point, it's kind of a layer down and maybe easier to make a plate, so to speak, to build your nutrition plan and things of that nature.
Yeah. I mean, it gives the person who, if a person is given macros as opposed to just a calorie count, it gives them more guidance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so it's a more specific way of doing it. And so again, these are all different tactics for being able to get a person to where they want to be, and to get, as a coach, getting them to eat what we want them to eat, and in a smart manner. And so the answer is going to be different for everybody. And I've seen coaches give very specific macro allotments for everything. I'll say you need this many grams of protein, you need this many grams of carbs, you need this many grams of fat. I use a couple different systems with my clients depending on one, the situation that they're in. I mean, if someone's traveling a lot, I'm not going to give them macros a lot of the time, because who wants to bring a food scale with them when they travel a lot? Maybe it's an unsustainable thing.
Right.
But there's different ways to handle it. And so when you're comparing macros to just counting calories as a blanket, either can work, but both probably need a little bit more nuance beyond just those numbers. Because again, what type of habits are we choosing out of these calories? Are we starting the meal off by choosing a lean meat or a lean protein source? That's probably something that everybody should be taught, no matter what tracking method they're using. I mean, even if you're just doing things ad libitum, you should probably be choosing a lean protein source for the majority of your meals as the premier. Okay, well, what am I going to get the first, and then build the rest of the meal off of that. I really don't want people to start a meal that's not a celebratory meal in some way with like potato salad, or and then build around the macaroni and cheese.
Right.
But if you put in these habit type, this habit structure in place, then it can give people that guidance for either using the calories or the macros to the best they possibly can.
Yeah, and I think doing that, what you're describing, really equips the individual to feel empowered and not restricted. Because I think so much of like the diet society that is going back to the marketing and jacking things up, where it's diet. Well, no, diet has turned into like a negative word, but it always, I feel like it comes with this level of burden that shouldn't be there. And I think
you're 100% right. You're 100% right.
Human element that you were talking about too, of like, you're often dealing with the mental, emotional aspects from a coaching perspective.
And you bring up a good point there, because when I say diet, I don't necessarily mean just losing body fat. I mean, whatever nutritional plan that you put into place. But to your point, the words that you say matter. And it's something that I've always told myself, you need to get away from doing this. When I say whatever diet you choose, I'm thinking, whatever dietary pattern you choose.
Exactly.
And yet Gen Pop generally won't see it that way, because when you say diet, it's always losing fat, because usually that's why people get started in.
Right. And it's in this short-term mindset too, like it's some 60 or 90-day thing.
Yeah.
It's not
and
a transformative lifestyle that's going to help with my health and longevity.
Right. Feel free to edit this out. I hate those 30 to 90-day challenges. I'm saying this in case you run a 30 to 90-day challenge. I hate those.
I was just about to, but I'm not anymore.
Thanks a lot. You just railroaded me. I hate them without context. And I hate them without context because when coaches push these 30 or 90-day challenges, it puts that mindset into play that this is a temporary thing. Now, if you do a 30 to 90-day challenge, but you term it differently and you say, this is your jumping off point, and we'll do it for 30 days,
something like that.
Yes, yeah, that's okay, and I like that. And again, this goes back to that whole, the words that you use matter. And so now that I've railroaded your 30-day challenge, you can turn it into the 30-day kickstart, and be completely successful in what you do. But I think that a lot of coaches don't realize, what they're doing when they term stuff like that. And again, this is experience that when you start to work with enough clients, you start to realize how ineffective that is. It's very effective for making some money. It's very ineffective for getting really good results, because what happens? So at the end of 30 days, you've got one of two things that are going to happen. One, you're going to get to whatever your goals were, and then you're going to feel lost because this was a 30-day plan that you had, and then you didn't really, think farther beyond that. Or two,
wasn't habit transforming.
Right. Or two, you're not going to get to the goal that you wanted to get within 30 days, and then you're going to feel like a failure. So at what point is this a super successful tactic for getting
Mhm.
people to make lifestyle change? And what you were pointing out previously is the smartest thing that a coach can do. And it was great that you said that, where this is a lifestyle change. It's not a diet. And I'm going to continue using diet because I'm an idiot, but
No, no,
but
it's
but
the
you're right.
origination of the term is what it's supposed to. It's just gotten hijacked from
Yeah. And
unfortunate marketing, although I'm a marketing guy, but it's just gotten hijacked and misappropriated, I think.
yeah, yeah. And I think that being conscious of the fact that people are going to look at it that way is probably the right way to deal with it. But your point was very salient in that, when you go into this type of thing, it's difficult. And it's difficult because as a person that's trying to make this journey, you're changing potentially many decades of habits.
Yep.
And so expect that this is going to be a really challenging thing to do. And being the nerd that I am, I actually I do a lot of study breakdowns. And there was one that I did a breakdown of that talked about habit change. And one of the I don't want to say myths, but common claims is that it takes 90 days to change habits. That's 100% false. That number is made up. It's a marketing term. It doesn't take 90 days to change habits. When you look at research and you look at people that are being very consistent in what they're doing, trying to change something that they've been doing for decades, it takes between 18 and 256 days. And I bring this up because I don't want people that are going on this journey to start out and, have this idea that in 2 months that everything's going to be easy. Will it get easier? Yeah, it will 100% get easier. Maybe it'll take the majority of a year to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that you should be discouraged. And even in that study that I'm thinking of, and if people want to ask for this later, certainly, message Scott or myself and on me on Instagram, because I don't check Facebook. But if you want to message me on Instagram, certainly do it. Or if you message Scott, I can get this for him. The study that looked at this found that even if people screwed up along the way, as long as they got back to that habit and didn't let that, so say that you are trying to make a habit of having a serving of vegetables at every meal. If you were thrown off for a day, as long as you got back on the next day, no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
The people that struggled were the ones that allowed it to snowball on themselves. And they had the issue where they got caught up in one day. And then that one day became a week, became 2 weeks. Then all of a sudden that 18 to 256 days got thrown out the window. But for those people that screwed up, and it is a screw up, and you're going to screw up, and that's okay. It's really important too to know that you're going to screw up because life happens. The people that screwed up, when they looked at that as a learning experience and then realized that they were resilient and got back on track, no problem. They stayed in that 18 to 256 day window.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one, you're going to screw up. But two, you're going to be fine, and it's going to take some time to build these habits, and there's nothing wrong with you, and you don't need to be vegan to do it. Good breakdown of today.
That was awesome. No, I really like what you had to say about that. That first part is huge. I think is, take a little bit air out of the tires a little bit to like relieve the pressure, so to speak, of this perfectionist mindset that I think has also been massively pervasive. It's just like roll with it, right? And I think I heard it. It's like the 2-day rule. Don't let it happen 2 days in a row, and then get back on it. Basically,
that's a good way to look at it. The other thing that I like that comes to my mind when we talk about this stuff is it's all or something, not all or nothing.
Yeah.
And I actually think that I made this comment again earlier this morning, but people expect themselves to be perfect. And if they're not perfect, then a lot of times people want to quit something because it's easier to quit and then not feel like you put a lot of effort in and failed than, to think, okay, well, what's something that I can do today? And again, this goes back to coaches talk about small incremental changes. Doesn't really matter if you can do the entire plan. What can you do from what you know that you probably should be doing? Right. And do that. Right. And as long as you're doing something, you're continuing to build a habit to add to that repertoire, to that toolbox that you're wanting to establish. And so by figuring out what you can do today, whether that's going on a 20-minute walk, whether it's, eating a vegetable, whether it's going to bed an hour earlier, you don't need to be up on YouTube at 11:30 p.m., learning about the Civil War. Like, it doesn't need to be that way. And I know that we get caught in those rabbit holes, but these are the types of things that time management comes into play, and planning ahead really makes a big difference. And if people sleep on the benefits that setting something in your scheduler and having a phone alarm go off on, you need to take advantage of that. Whether it's meal prepping some food to have for the week, or whether it's getting to bed earlier, or whether it's reminding yourself that it's time to get up at work and go for a 5-minute walk. All of these things really add in.
Yeah.
And take advantage of the tools that you have.
Yeah. Especially if you live in Maui,
Right. Where time doesn't really pass.
It's like the ultimate Groundhog Day of like sun and lush garden.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the days are really bad when we have like a cloud in the sky and we have to deal with shade.
Yeah.
Then seasonal affective disorder kicks in full effect, and we're like, what the hell's happening?
On that note, that's when I cut you out. No, I'm just kidding. Well, Allan, I really appreciate your time and insights. I know I could probably continue bantering with you on a variety of topics. I just enjoy the conversation. So thank you for that and your expertise. So where can folks find you?
You can look up information on me on mauiathletics.com. I've got links to all of my social media pages down at the bottom. Specifically, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at Dr. Allan, Allan Bacon, DRALLAN Bacon, and I'll respond to those as best I can.
Great. And I like to close things out with a couple questions, 3 questions, a bit of a hot seat, but nothing too heavy. So what are you reading right now?
This is really embarrassing. Because I read research and science and stuff like that all day, right? So what I do for fun is I actually read sci-fi and fantasy novels.
Okay.
And I'm reading real trash fantasy right now, R.A. Salvatore. And he has this series on this character called Driss Duerden. So it's extremely nerdy, and I'm doing that, but it's something that I don't really have to think about, and I can read it before bed to help me get to sleep.
There you go. What are you listening to right now, be it music or podcast?
Music wise, in the gym, I listen to a lot of house type electro stuff, metal, and a little bit of hip hop, but mostly the first two. As an example of something, have you seen John Wick 4?
I have not yet.
Okay, so the type of music that's in that I would listen to a lot these days.
Okay, good reference point. All right, last one. What is your go-to rest and recovery method?
Go-to rest and recovery is active recovery. I think that people really sleep. I mean, aside from sleep, I think that people really sleep on the benefits of active recovery. And I mean, if you look at the recovery benefits of doing a little bit of active recovery, light cardio work, even just light weight work, on a day that maybe you want to just do some skill stuff and go in and just feel okay to get some blood pumping, it makes a huge difference. It makes a bigger difference than sauna. It makes a bigger difference than icing. It makes a bigger difference than foam rolling and all these other things that we do that we spend so much time doing. You can get, in my opinion, and from the research that I've seen, you can get those benefits and more from just getting out and taking a walk in the sunshine. And then you're getting your step count up too. And maybe you're taking your dog on a walk. You're doing all of these different things.
Getting the vitamin D.
Yeah. And so active recovery for me is the number one way to do it. And I think that the benefits of that are great.
Awesome. Well, Allan, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity.